Havoc Demon Hunter finally got some changes in Season 2 of the War Within 11.1 patch, and things are different now, but should you play it? Let's break it down. So, first things first, what's new? And we're going to start with the Havoc Demon Hunter Spec tree. They've actually made a few changes to the Spec tree just in general that make it a lot better for Havoc Demon Hunter and play a lot better. A lot of new talent options and a lot of things have changed for the better, in my opinion. I actually really like where the Spec tree is at. Starting off, the biggest thing for a lot of players is that you no longer need to use Fel Rush ever if you don't want to. Now, they've accomplished this in two ways. First things first is that Unbound Chaos has been tied to Vengeful Retreat, as has Inertia. So beforehand, where you'd use Immolation Aura to get your Unbound Chaos and your Inertia, it's now tied to Vengeful Retreat. But the biggest thing is that they've also added Fellblade as a trigger for both those spells. So before, where they'd both only be consumed by Fel Rush, they now can both be consumed by Fellblade. So you can use Fellblade in every scenario as long as you want. The only place where you'd really ever want to use Fel Rush is an AoE in a large pack, but even then, Fellblade feels a lot quicker, it's a lot snappier after you use Vengeful Retreat. So if you are a Fel Rush hater and you're fine with Vengeful Retreat, then you can take a use of all the movement talents now. It's better for spec design as well in raid fights where there's a lot of movement. Personally, I actually think it feels pretty good. Fel Rush is a very fun spell in my opinion, but it can be frustrating at times. And I think the Fellblade trigger to it is much better. So in doing that, they've also redone Exergy as well. Exergy is the new momentum. Beforehand, where it was just Fel Rush as much as you can, now every time you hunt or Vengeful Retreat, you get a 20-second buff of 5% damage. Now this means you have 100% uptime of this buff every time you use VR or the hunt, which means that it is going to be basically just a passive 5% damage gain as long as you're using it, which is a very strong option and a very just passive set it and forget it option. So what this has done is it's made Exergy and Inertia very close in basically everything. Inertia is slightly better in single target. Exergy at the moment slightly better in Mythic Plus. But they also made no mover builds a lot better, as especially in AoE where they were pretty far behind before. But now, because Inertia is no longer tied to Immolation Aura, you don't get twice as many of them, which means that no mover builds are a lot more viable in Mythic Plus, and in testing, a lot of people have been doing well with them. So that is one big change. Second big change, they reworked Cycle of Hatred completely. Beforehand, where Cycle of Hatred would be like every time you used Chaos Strike, Blade Dance, Throw Glaive, or Glaive Tempest, depending on your talents, it would reduce 1 second with 2 points. Now, every time you use I-Beam, the next I-Beam gets its cooldown reduced by 5 seconds, up to 20 seconds. So after 4 I-Beams, your I-Beam will be 20 seconds permanently for the rest of the fight. This is a huge change. This buff will drop off after 1 minute out of combat without using I-Beam, which basically means that as long as you use an I-Beam, if you're like in a huge RP portion of like a dungeon or something, don't use I-Beam every minute, which is pretty easy to do, then you will not lose this buff and will have it for the full duration of a Mythic Plus dungeon. You'll have it for the full duration of a raid boss, and it persists through death as well. It does wipe on boss start, key start, and on zone change, but otherwise you will have this the whole time. This is a huge change, and if you're someone who really liked I-Beaming a lot, then this means that I-Beam is a 20-second cooldown and you'll be using I-Beam twice as much as before. It feels super fun. I love using I-Beam, obviously, and it also helps with a lot of uptime problems the Cycle of Hatred had before, where you had to stick to your target for the whole duration, or else you kind of were just screwed and lost a lot of damage. The final big change to the Havoc Demon Hunter Spec tree is the removal of Any Means Necessary. Now, Any Means Necessary was removed. It was a talent that made all of our non-chaos magic damage into chaos and gave it 80% of our mastery bonus. Now, the thing with this is it was a pretty boring talent and it was taken at every single opportunity, which is kind of boring. And it's gone. And you're probably wondering, well, mastery is horrible now. You're right, it was, but they've buffed it by 25%, which is a huge buff. And they've added a component to any a fire inside, which makes Immolation Aura chaos damage. So you still have that portion in AoE. Now, in its place, they've added the talent Screaming Brutality. Now, if you've played Havoc for at least the last year, you might recognize that name, and that is the name of the Season 3 Dragonflight tier set. So Havoc now has the ability to throw glaives with Blade Dance and also trigger the free passive glaives like we did in Dragonflight Season 3 and Emir Drasil, and it is very powerful. It's very satisfying to see the glaives flying out, and it's a really strong tool for us to have now, and it isn't even used in every situation. Some builds don't play it, so I think they did a great job. So in total, they've also like buffed a few other things and done some tuning changes. The Hunt and Sigil of Spite are now on the Mastery and are actually chaos damage. They've buffed a few other things. And in general, the spec tree is a lot better. There's a lot more talent options in both Mythic Plus and Raid. And really, it's in a pretty good spot now. There are still some problems with it, but it is much improved from where we were before. But what about the hero talent trees? So the hero talent trees, honestly, are probably the worst part of Havoc still, just flat out. Starting with Fel-Scarred, nothing's really changed for the better with Fel-Scarred, but the removal of enemies necessary did cause a nerf to Demon Surge and Burning Blades, most of the damage of the tree, because it was fire and now no longer is scaling to chaos. Now it was bugged to deal more damage than intended. Obviously that's been fixed because enemies necessary is gone. So those have taken a hit. They've been rebuffed, obviously not as much as they were nerfed beforehand. So Fel-Scarred has lost a lot of power, at least at the time of me writing this. What else has happened though is they've buffed up Flamebound, the option against the Sigil student thing, where Sigil Flame gave you a buff, to actually be a viable option in Mythic Plus now, which is pretty good. It makes it deal 50% extra crit damage to Immolation Aura, and also gives the increased 2-yard radius to Rage Fire as well. So you're hitting more Rage Fires and they're hitting harder, which is a good change and makes it a lot better. And they've also nerfed the Sigil buff mastery thing by a bit, I believe by 30%, and nerfed its Fury Generation. Fury Generation doesn't matter, who cares? The mastery buff does suck and it does nerf, obviously, Fel-Scarred, but it is a bit to balance it against the other option, which is perfectly fine in my opinion. You don't want to use one in every scenario, and also to offset the mastery buff they got. Now they also soft capped Demon Surge at 8 targets. So before it was a really strong uncapped nuke, it now is soft capped, so it does full damage to 8 targets and then starts to square root after that, which does suck in large pulls, of course. But they have also buffed up the Focused Hatred ability to where we thought it would work. They fixed the bug, and now if you're fighting 1 target, it's 50% damage, 2 targets, it's 40% damage to both, 3, 30% target to all 3, and so on. And then they removed like 1 stack from Demonic Intensity, which doesn't actually matter, it's just a cosmetic thing. So in total, Fel-Scarred is a lot worse than it was before. Obviously, it's still there if you want to play it. It's, you know, you have I-Beam twice as often now, so you get a lot more Demon Surges. But there is some weird interactions with it because you don't drop Demon Form all that often as much. So there are scenarios where you might like just not get extra Demon Surges. And it's kind of weak. It's playable in dungeons, not very playable in Raid right now. Which brings us to Aldrachi Reaver. Now, one of the big new things I think is that, I just showed in my video on Friday, Aldrachi Reaver got new animations. I think this does help. They're not insane animations. I don't think either tree is really that visually stunning, but it is something. So as addition to the glaive, which already existed, they've added a proc from Wounded Quarry that comes down from the sky and hits your target, which is very noticeable. They've added a small glow on the Reaver's marked target. They've added slashes to the extra blade dance slashes, like the little claw swipes. And they've added animations to yourself for both the Army Unto Oneself and then the Soul Shield one. So whenever you have the defensive up, there is a visible notification of that. Now, that's fine, I guess. Still, I wish it was more visual, but they have done some changes to it to make it a bit better. The only change is that of Wounded Quarry. Now, one of the big problems with Aldrachi Reaver beforehand was its uptime reliance. Now, the change to cycle that I talked about does fix that. But on top of that, Wounded Quarry has been changed. So beforehand, where it was whenever you autoed your Reaver's marked target, you had a chance of dealing damage, getting a soul. Now, it's that whenever you mark a target, any physical damage you deal to any target reflects 20% of that as chaos back to that target, and those procs can give you a chance to get a soul. Now, this does result in less soul generation because the procs only happen once a second instead of your melees. Not a huge difference, but it is slightly less. But this is a really, really powerful, and in my opinion, really fun, because it's a unique thing Havoc has now, funnel tool. It's one of the best funnel tools in the game that has honestly ever existed, and it's really strong. Right now, as of the time as I'm recording this, so Thursday, the 20th of February, it is bugged to be dealing more damage than intended, but even if they fix this, it's still very strong, and honestly, pretty fun to play with. And you will notice the Wounded Quarry procs coming out of the sky whenever it hits it. So you're probably wondering, like, what physical damage do you deal? You honestly deal a lot of physical damage with this tree, with Preemptive Strike, Reaver's Glaives, AoE Blade Dance, all the glaives you're throwing out with Scream Brutality. So there is actually a good deal of physical damage you deal, and you're funneling all that plus Mastery back into your main target, and it's pretty strong. So while I don't think the gameplay of either tree is like amazing, they're both fine, they're both playable, they're both like, you know, I can play this and not hate myself, where Reaver's Glaive Mark stuff, I used to not enjoy that. They've also limited Reaver's Mark to 1, which really helps in AoE, and the visuals are improved, and I do like the funnel, but obviously, you know, there is steps to go there. So that brings us to viability and should you play it. Honestly, I think Havoc is more fun than it was in the last patch, but I do think the hero trees do need work still. Hopefully that comes in the future, and I do think it's worth playing. Right now, in terms of viability, which can and will change, Havoc looks very strong. We have really good single target, not factoring in the Runakori bug in the upper like third, basically. I don't know where exactly in there, but we're pretty strong sim. And we have a really good funnel and cleave, which is a really strong profile to have. Funnel is insanely valuable in every single situation. And just the passive cleave we do as Havoc is, like, if you remember Dragonflight Season 3, that's the level of cleave we're getting, which is really, really powerful and crazy good. Plus all the Reaver's Mark funnel stuff, which is, again, pretty insane. In dungeons, our AoE damage is strong. There's a lot of different viable builds. No mover is viable, low mover is viable. Inertia or Exergy are very close to each other. You can play Glaive Tempest, you can play Essence Break, you can play neither of them. There's a lot of different options in Mythic Plus, and they're all pretty strong. But Funnel will remain our niche right now. Again, if they fix the bug, will be a little worse at that, but still pretty good overall. I think Havoc will get invited to groups. Havoc will get invited to raids, obviously, because of 3% magic, but we'll be pretty strong in both of them, and you won't feel like a burden, which I think is really good. The Mythic Plus meta looks to be more open next season as well, so I think Havoc can find a spot in that. And altogether, I do think it's going to be a very fun season for Havoc, but one where we're pretty strong, but probably not like going to get nuked to the sky. Now, we'll see what happens with the bug fix when that happens. It hasn't happened yet by the time I'm writing this. But we'll see how that ends up. But I think Havoc's actually pretty fun. If you want to alt it and play it with the Fellblade stuff because you don't want to use Fel Rush, I think you should give it a try. Eye beaming every 20 seconds is really fun. And the fact that we don't Fel Rush anymore, I think should bring a lot of players back to the spec. Now, you still use Vengeful Retreat. If you don't want to do that, again, there are viable options. But we'll see where that brings you. So pretty fun stuff. Honestly, I think Havoc's in a much better spot. And yeah, so we're gonna have guide videos, of course. My full guide video will be Friday, I think 28th of February will be my guide video. I'll have a short video out the day of the patch launch covering like a build to play for Raid and Mythic Plus if you're playing this week. And otherwise, I'm super excited. Check me out on Twitch. I'll be streaming a lot of Havoc stuff for this season, maybe some other stuff as well. Twitch.tv/Vudosaurus. And thanks for watching, guys. This is gonna be a fun ride. Like, comment, subscribe as you try and get to 15,000 by the end of the year, and appreciate y'all watching. Peace. A big thank you to all of my channel members. Thank you to Rukaza, Alexander Trufonovich, Fear Redefined, Loose Change, Zuligan, Gabrielle Correa, Magic Man 133, and Felfederin Dark Terror. Thank you so much to everybody here. If you guys want to help support me and just help grow the channel, consider joining the channel number down below. Get your name right at the end of every video. If you otherwise, you can watch me on Twitch as well. You can sub there. And just thank you everybody watching my video. Thank you to my channel members for supporting me and helping me do this. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.